to the listenership, the viewership, and of course you, Steve, and your whole team, and oh, my dear friend Richard Ragoobarsingh, still my dear friend. Yes, Richard.
Hi, how are you, Karen?
I
I
am
guess I'm not
fine.
your friend.
There's a
Okay, but it's all
gentleman
right.
there.
Paul will get jealous now, man.
Poor,
I guess I'm not your friend. Richard
right,
is your friend.
poor Richard. You know something? We
Let me
speak.
sign off one time. I go on.
Oh, God, where you going? Where you going? Oh, Paul, no. Don't do that.
Well, you said Richard is your friend, and I was here, so I felt offended immediately. But
Oh, I'm
it's all right.
sorry, because what, you're not friends with Richard?
Listen,
So
But apparently I'm not friends with you.
friendly with you?
Paul is very sensitive.
Okay, I'm sorry, Paul.
He
I'm
totes
sorry, Paul.
quickly. He totes quickly, Karen.
Good morning, Mrs. Teixeira.
Good morning to you.
Yeah. Let me change. Good morning, Madam Teixeira.
Madam. Whoa. That sounds like back
I
in the
don't want to
day.
be sarcastic. Good morning, Mrs. Teixeira. I withdraw that
Good
statement.
morning, Karen. Good morning, Karen. That will be even better.
Good morning, Karen. How are you?
I am good and happy to be with you.
I love your archery.
All of you. What's this?
I love your archery in the
Oh
background.
my God, I try to set up myself in such a way these days because I was told, Karen, you shouldn't have a background where people could see what's in your background. So there am I thinking, oh, this is now the perfect thing that nobody could see anything.
And then
And
there
Paul
goes,
Macquarie archery.
and
Anyway,
and Paul sounded like he wanted to see more. He was
speak for yourself. We invited you here to talk about as a former finance minister
Yes.
in the Manning administration, your initial thoughts on the present finance minister's spotlight presentation. Let's start with your overall thoughts.
Well, I think surprisingly it was more sobering for him because everything is relative. And relative to previous presentations, when he was more static, cannot even capture the way in which he would present budget presentations, which always turned out that he would overstate both the revenue and he would overstate what he would get from natural gas production. So even from his first budget with the fiscal deficit. So what I would say is that at this point in time, 7 years down the road, there has been criticism from all quarters that his budget predictions and his budget projections are not that reliable. What he said this time, well, I mean, oil and gas prices have gone through the roof. And so as we were talking, when he talks in terms of GDP, which is the value of goods and services produced for the fiscal year, yes, of course, it's gone significantly high because of prices of oil and gas. But if you strip out these prices that have increased on oil and gas and petrochemicals, and you look at the actual value of the goods and services, according to CSO, we've gone to negative growth, which means that instead of the economy growing, which you would think because we're getting so much more GDP, more goods and services, it's not more goods and services, the values have gone up, and not because of anything that we have done, extraneous us, Ukraine war, what's going on in Europe, the winter, a number of factors. We are benefiting from that. But are we really benefiting? When we look at CSO yesterday, I read it, and they said late asphalt, which that is 56% negative, and a number of others. Even construction had a negative growth. So he didn't talk about that. He did talk about the subsidies. He did talk about, I wondered why he didn't talk about HSF.
Yeah, well, before you move on, because we had a discussion with Mariana Brown yesterday also, and he also focused on the fact that while we are benefiting and we have increased revenues, our outputs are down in significant sectors, and that is something we should be looking at in the country. Because if our outputs are down in natural gas and have been down for a while, we've spoken about the reduced output of natural gas, the reduced output in oil, and the possible impact on that on the net potential earning of the country. It is something we should be focusing on more. Yes, we're getting more revenues, but it's not because of something that we're doing. It's because of external factors as you just identified.
Yeah, and also too, I spoke to someone who should be in the know in relation to how they come to the revenue take from the oil and gas sector. And what I was told, it's not just a combination, it's price and production. And that is what they use to determine the tax take. So we know that the production rates have been significantly lower, We know that the deep round bids was not taken up. 3 out of 17 was the amount they taken on, even though gas prices are going through the roof. We are benefiting from LNG, that is for sure, because pipeline delivery of natural gas from Russia to Europe has been a cause of a power play. So we know that the LNG is good for us, that it is making the money up. So they unitized train 2, 3, and 4 after finally having to admit that train 1 was producing nothing of consequence. So what I will say is that it comes back to what I started by saying. It's not just only that the GDP has increased, the nominal GDP, but it really worries me that should there have been greater revenue take? Because I was told that production is part of what the revenue position would be for energy. And what is happening with HSF? Because the minister was very adamant in his media review that he had crossed the threshold under the legislation to make deposits, yet we are hearing nothing has been done for the 2 quarters, and it makes you wonder what is going on. And that is consistent, if I just may add, with the government. You know, there's a lot at this 7th year. I want to say to you that you know, people just don't have confidence. And if you want to test that they don't have confidence, the tutor, what happened yesterday with tutor, that cross political lines, you know, that cross political lines. What happened in Tobago? If you want to know what the people are feeling about the government, the confidence level, and you know why the inflation rate is so low also? It has a lot to do with the fact, and this is what the central bank has reported, consumer confidence is not there. People do not have the confidence in the economy, i.e. they don't have confidence in what the government is saying to them, and they're not wrong, because nearly every project that they have touted from day one has not been implemented. And when they get into a problem, they set up a committee. I mean, how many times are you going to do that people are not eventually going to catch on and say, enough is enough? And this is what we're seeing now. So in closing on the general point, whilst what he has said, handpicked who he has to talk at the spotlight, the reality is that I think people are so disillusioned, and rightfully so, with his government's commitment to implementation, which the IMF has talked about. The agencies like S&P and Moody's have indicated that you really have a sense that, you know, we'll believe it when we see it. I don't know.
When you say the confidence is down, how do we disaggregate in Trinidad and Tobago the political divide, where very often on critical issues, many of which you've just identified, when you say people are not confident, supporters of the PNM and the Prime Minister will say, well, they're confident, and people who don't support the government will say they're not confident, and we can't seem to get to the point where we are discussing issues apolitically. Or is that a naive assumption that we can discuss anything apolitically?
Well, why I said, made that comment, you are correct that a lot of the issues are seen through the lens of race and religion and so on. So it makes Trinidad a very hard country to run. It makes it an exciting and so on, but it also makes it very difficult, because when one looks at, you know, you compare ourselves with Barbados and Jamaica, it's really not a fair comparison in the sense that they might have a class structure, but they do have the complexities that we have. But I think Tutor was a good example, because I think when you saw, from what I've read, the low turnout, it had to be that the low turnout had to be a circumstance where it crossed political divides. It had to be that, because it couldn't have had that level of success that the papers are reporting. Something like 70% of the teachers did not turn out.
But there are negotiations for better salaries, and the negotiation doesn't seem to be going their way. So is it that directly political, or is it a matter of bread and butter?
But you see, in the past, when they have tried to do that, in the earlier days of this government, when its first iteration of its government, I don't think that when Tutor, I think if I could recall that it was not successful. And, you know, we have to wake up. I mean, even if you look at Tobago, our wee boy, look at what happened. I mean, he got a proper trouncing there. So, you know, and one would think that, okay, the UNC did not contest a seat there. That is true. That is true. but it's also a wake-up call. Even the local government elections, I think that COVID-19 was a great savior for the PNM because the strength that the Prime Minister has was a strength that was good for COVID-19. People didn't go around that by that river and they didn't go in the sea because they feel that that man was making sport with them and they put on the mask. So that strength that he showed at COVID-19 was a good strength. But if you can recall, just before COVID-19 came, Kamala, who was seen as a spent force, I'm not saying she's not either, but at that time she really was seen as a spent force. She did not get the kind of support financial for her campaign, and yet she gained a seat. And when you see that she could gain a seat, when she is seen as Barrett and all these people deserting her, and in all these circumstances, when Monica done with the PNM local government election effort, and she could gain a seat, it was a wake-up. It wasn't seen as a wake-up call. It was seen as some message. And then COVID came, and all things were well, and the government correctly called.
But she gained the seat, but she still didn't win the election.
Yeah, but it's still, what I'm saying is she gained a seat.
So if there was such discontent with the Rowley administration from 2015 to 2020, which is what you're suggesting, and Mrs. Prasad Bissessa, who, in your words, was seen as a spent force, gained the seat, one would have imagined that the country would have voted out the PNM, Dr. Rowley's administration, and voted Mrs. Prasad Bissessa again. But that didn't happen. So how do we rationalize that? Well, the PNM lost ground. All governments generally lose ground after a term in office, but not enough discontent to unseat the government.
COVID-19. I just said it was COVID-19. I don't think there was anyone in Trinidad, regardless of, unless you were strongly a UNC and you were not, but the COP, the 25-30%, because I've heard it among them and even myself. I said, if you ever need, you've seen what was happening in America. In America, it was so politicized that if you put on the mask, you were being anti-Trump. If it what they think, they had such a hard time. And then numbers, we were watching the numbers in America rising every day. We were looking at what was happening in Europe. So live, we were seeing what was happening when people were not cooperating.
Just so clear, isn't that you saying that Dr. Rowley's management of the pandemic is what got the PNM back in power?
Why are you saying it in such a manner as if I'm being, as it's unbelievable that could
No, I'm not saying this. I just want to be clear.
No, because the way you're saying it is like, yes, I think that when he called the elections in the August, he called it at the right time because WHO and every international organization was praising him for how he handled the COVID. And everybody, we must have short memories, but when COVID was raging, people were in such fear. And remember, every Thursday he would have his cabinet meeting, but that was a platform meeting. Kamala couldn't do that. And everybody was listening. Why? Not because they were listening to Rowley, but because they were listening to what heaven's name was happening in the country. And from my experience, and I know that across the board with many people, once the vaccine became available, the government managed it well. Now, the health workers may have had a hard time, but they managed it well. You went to get your vaccine, they had everything set up, and then you looked at what was happening in the so-called big developed countries, and you say, but we done good. The Prime Minister, real man, and he called the shot at the right time. A day in politics is a lifetime. You asking me as a politician? A day in politics is a lifetime.
So then where's the government now after that? Because we're 2 years in now after that. Right. Where are we now?
Right. So back to reality. Now the numbers have gone down. People are wearing masks. So now they can focus on what the heavens name has this government done. You know, they got so much grant, and more importantly, the price of oil and gas has skyrocketed. And the petrochemical, ammonia and methanol that had almost shut down a lot of their plants like Yara and so on, all back and running. So we know fertilizers is important for production of food and so on. So what has happened is that since then, the government has gotten a great increase in the GDP. So that should translate, of course, into revenue. The problem is, and I have said it, and this is the point now, people are back to thinking, well, what has this government really done? Every time that prime minister, now they could go back and relax and start to think. Say every time that minister of finance speaks, he's always overstating production of gas. He's always overstating the revenue. How could you? The chamber had to even call him out on that. And you know what that goes to? Confidence. Why is it the National Statistical Institute, you cannot manage what you do not measure? Why don't we have the Gini coefficient, which tells us the income inequality in the country? Because I've read a few articles from UNDP and all of them, and what they say, it's not poverty, it's income inequality, the income inequality. What is now people are seeing, but wait now, who are the people benefiting from this government?
Well, let's break that down. So you could use the term Gini coefficient, which is a measurement of the income inequality in the country. So what you're saying, and you say that's different from poverty. Break that down for us, please.
Meaning that, for persons, what they have said, and I'm just quoting from the international organizations, they are saying that poverty, of course, poverty is a problem, but poverty in of itself is not the issue that creates tension and social unrest in a country, especially if you're living also in urban areas where there are these clusters, and outside of that cluster of persons, there is the wealth, because that's where you find it in urban communities. You see the people living in the more upscale areas, you see in the cars, you see in the buildings, you're seeing, so it's not hidden from you like it is in a rural community where you're seeing animals and farms and so on. So what they're saying is it's not necessarily the poverty in and of itself, but it's the spread of the
resources.
The resources around the community. And the Gini coefficient, they measured it up to 1991 in the CSO, because I went in there and I went back and said, well, why did you stop measuring it? You stopped measuring it because what it would show, it's not completely reliable, because I read you can't completely rely on it, because they are like everything that has its weaknesses. But what it does tell you is if the country made $10 million, right? And you said, okay, I'm going to take that $10 million per capita and spread it among, by the way, it has, I don't know if you had said it, but someone had said it, it's true, I think Mariano said it, that you realize the population is getting small, from 1.4 is down to 1.3 something, so it means people are leaving, unless they're dying, which I don't think there's that level of death in the country, we'd recognize it. But when you take the GDP per capita and you see, okay, the country made $10 million, and if I gave everybody in the country equal amount of that $10 million, which made up how many people you have, that still is not telling you that is not giving the real picture. What gives you the real picture is a Gini coefficient, which tells you the percentage of that 10 million that is going to which percent of the economy, country, people, and what going to the what do you call the bulk of the people. And what it shows you is that I'm not saying that is so, so don't quote me as saying that is so. But for example, it may very well be that 70% of that 10 million is going to 3% of the population, and 30% is going to the rest. No, they're not telling you that. So what is the point of a government? Even before I came on this show, I am a politician, it is true, even though I'm not politically active, but I did still do see things from the lens of government. What is your duty as a government? Who are the people that voted you in? What was their expectation? This is a democracy. Had they not voted you in, would you be there? But instead of you trying to uplift them and make them into micro entrepreneurs, can I give you a classic example, two classic examples of how this government has portrayed the managed, who has voted them in, right? You look at the situation with the scrap iron. What is the government just shut it down without a plan? And then the answer is to give them a subsidy? How insulting it is. What can a subsidy do? And then you have to go through hoops before you ever see that subsidy, let's be honest. And then you look at Lake Asphalt. That's another travesty. You shut down Petrotrin. Well, when you shut down Petrotrin, you shut down bitumen. When you shut down bitumen, Lake Asphalt, the last time they made a profit was in 2015. The government is giving Lake Asphalt a subvention of 2.5 million. You want to be efficient? 2.5 million a month to pay salaries for nothing, hardly anything to be done. No audited accounts. You want to see inefficiency? So when you ask me that, you know, I look at this government, it's a government not of the people, and it's insulting. And when you have a prime minister, a minister of national security, and a commissioner of police singing from the same hymn book, saying the same foolishness about family values, let me say, I know that family values plays a part. So don't misquote me, anyone, to say, Tishera say, it doesn't matter. I know it matters. But what I do know is that when you don't have that parental management, you don't have that thing, you are vulnerable. And that is what those who don't live in those communities trade on to go after those same young people who are most vulnerable in our society. And this is very painful for me. And this government, by all its policies, has only enriched the wealthy. And what they've done with the ones at the bottom of this thing, which are many of them who have become disenchanted, stop giving them subsidies and making them dependent on you and say, you see, look at them, they don't want to work. Why don't you turn around and try and make them into micro entrepreneurs?
But how do you, I hear you, and I hear you with regard to the income equality issue. And I mean, there is still a certain level of subsidies that is in effect in terms of the public purse. So, I mean, I don't think it's
unnecessary.
Yeah, but I wouldn't say, but it's not accurate to say that there are no subsidies. There are subsidies. There's still subsidies there that are trying to ease that part of the population that is really struggling. But how does a government navigate coming out of a pandemic, which the whole world is grappling with, inflation at record levels in Europe and the US, and struggling with the economic situation, and Trinidad and Tobago in its own little place, struggling with our own economic situation and the external factors that have always affected us? That's nothing new. We have always been subject to external forces in terms of what our basic commodities are. That's nothing new. How does a government navigate, in your opinion? And I suppose the question is, what are they not doing, in your opinion, in terms of bridging that income equality gap within a framework where you have come from a pandemic that has been pretty devastating to the planet?
Okay, so Richard, you're looking like an intellectual. I have to say that to start with. But having said that little part, all oranges and apples, they're not all equal. In America, unemployment levels are about the lowest. In June, they expected, June or July, they expected the unemployment rate to go down to 3.6, it went down to 3.5. There's a great demand for employment in America. So, and not the URP, CPEP make work employment, because businesses are recovering, especially in the service sector. People want to travel, and what is pushing the inflation rate up has a lot to do with what they call demand pull, meaning people are wanting to spend, they're free to spend, but the unemployment level is very low. The inflation is being driven by those factors. And also, of course, yes, they export energy, but they also feel in the pinch because they don't produce enough energy. And when you pull out the from the core inflation, what are the two main factors that are affecting inflation? It will be food and energy. And for America, the inflation is really driven a lot by the demands from a population that is now being allowed to spend and allowed to be, and therefore demand is pushing it. So that is America. When you look at Europe, Europe's position is they don't produce enough energy. About 38 to 48% of their natural gas comes from Russia, and they relied on a pipeline delivery for that. Germany, of all countries, started to burn coal. So they have supply management issues. They also now can't get the natural gas because of now Russia is telling them that note line thing. They say, well, we can't fix it because you'll have all these embargoes against us. So Europe's problems are not because they don't have enough food. Holland is the second largest global exporter of food in the world. They're not talking about they don't have food. Venezuela talking that. Sri Lanka talking that. Europe not talking that. Europe talking, yes, their food prices have gone up, but it's supply chain management issues and energy the energy that they don't simply have. I think Biden eased up on Venezuela with the PDVSA and allowed Eni in Italy and Repsol in Spain to import oil from Venezuela because things are so hard. Saudi Arabia say we're not producing any much more. So their factors are not our factors. So don't mix up the oranges and apples, right?
You misinterpreted me because I was just saying that the world is grappling with different problems. Yeah, I'm not saying that everybody is going to be contextually the same. That would be mad.
And that's my point because
so I'm saying, but in a Trinidad and Tobago context, what is the government not doing in your opinion?
Okay, so I had to put those two examples because the reasons why they are experiencing problems is the reason why we are doing well. When America has problems with things, it's because we are doing well. So in Trinidad and Tobago, if you said to me that oil and gas prices remained subdued and coming out of them, which we got a lot of grants, the SDRs, the special drawing rights that we got, the bond issues that we raised, and also, of course, the what we're now getting from our foreign exchange reserves are 6.9 billion, which it should never be there. So I don't want to go down that line. The point I'm making, though, is coming out of COVID-19, Trinidad got the gift that energy prices went through the roof, and guess what happened? So our experience is really a food issue rather than an energy issue, which are the two key factors affecting the globe, energy and food. We don't have, and not only don't we not have the energy problem, but in fact, we are benefiting, just like Russia is benefiting from the high prices, especially in LNG, because a lot of the European countries are saying, you want to hold us to ransom with the pipeline? Well, we go in LNG. And to put up and to manufacture an LNG infrastructure, it takes years. To build ships, it takes time. Trinidad and Tobago is making a killing, as we should, with export of LNG, which is being taken by ship rather by pipeline. So if you want to know why I had to tell you that, because you cannot talk about Trinidad unless you talk about the LNG, the oil, the gas, the ethanol, and all of that, which has put Trinidad way up and has nothing to do with us.
I'm glad to
I still want to get a sense of what is the government not doing in terms of the income equality issue that you brought up, because you're coming out of the pandemic, you have this rise, and in part fueled by the Ukraine war. So how do you what is it that they should be doing that they're not doing?
Right. So let me just say, I don't know why you think this government is a government of 2 years. Okay, so you seem to be putting the 7 years as if COVID was the 2 years of this government's running. So they had a lot of years before, and now they have years after. So let's take all the years. And what I am trying to say to you is not so much what they're not doing, is what they have been doing. So let's give some examples. Okay, the public-private partnership. Who, in heaven's name, can compete for a public-private partnership in this country unless you already have the money? Who can go to HDC and say we will build houses when they tell you you will get preferential treatment if you own land already? Who is going to get those contracts? Procurement legislation. Up to now, they have not passed a procurement. Who is benefiting from the fact that you have not passed the procurement legislation? The Prime Minister got having a problem with the Chinese with the 5,500 houses, and then they bust the file and they say, well, that was not a good contract, so they had to scuttle it. Who is benefiting from the secrecy surrounding these construction projects, when the very same companies that are getting these contracts are the companies known for not finishing their design, have variations, late delivery, and in huge increased costs, and yet you keep on going to them? Who is benefiting when this guy Steve Alvarez told me, Maruga, when they put it on the fishing depot, the amount you had to pay just a tender was $10,000. Who down there had $10,000? Well, they didn't tender. Who got the job? According to him, a company outside of the area. Who worked on the project? Nobody from Grand Chimene or the surrounding areas. They brought their workforce. So the procurement, the gambling, everybody knows that gambling is associated with money. If you want to pretend to put your head in the sand, put your head in the sand. Okay? But that gambling legislation, which they will not pass, and they operated, your same minister in his first speech said that Trinidad and Tobago has the most unregulated private member, I don't know if he didn't use the word casino,
members clubs
in the world. They up to now, he has not passed the regulations for the procurement to be things. So they continue to do what they do. Look, Mr. Dumas wrote an article about it. Too much secrecy. Who is benefiting? Who is benefiting from the lack of procurement pledges? Who is benefiting from the Revenue Authority not being operational? Who is benefiting from the gambling legislation, which is a waste of time because you have to give them, you can't go in there and do a sting. You have to get a thing from the magistrate in order to enter a search warrant. So they already clean up their mess. Who is benefiting from the public-private partnership? Central Bank, by the way, a few years ago, they had an article done by 2 people. They said, our public-private partnerships working in Trinidad. And they used the example of Rosewood Gardens. And they said, the overruns, the delays and everything, where's the efficiency? Where's value for money? Where's the transparency? The only people who benefiting from what this government's policy and legislation are those who already have. Okay, so if you want to answer, it is a negative answer to your positive. Meanwhile, they have to have their cheap labor. Meanwhile, they have to have them vote. So what you do with them? Keep them dependent on you and still paying them a little subsidy, which makes them perfect for the informal trade. So if you want to pretend that you don't understand that this is deliberate, and I want to say one last thing. I always criticize NAR, because there are some people who are so NAR and I told them they were out of touch with the people. That was their main problem, whether they were well-intentioned. But one thing they did before they lost government, which I have to give them credit, which I didn't know before I read the Lester Henry article, that they had offered the VSEF and VTEP for all these WASL companies. They pay it off and they start back and build them. All governments do that, right? But what they did is they started a small business development company so that they would take them and transition them into becoming micro-entrepreneurs. Why is this government not doing that in agro and agro-industry? Why is this government not doing that with cultural tourism? Why is this government not creating opportunities? Because all those people that have money now, some of them anyhow, started small. Why are you not taking them off of the subsidies and really implementing? What's the implementation history of this government? You saw the Toko Ferry yet? You saw Sandals yet? You saw Dragonfield yet? You saw the National Statistical Institute yet? You saw the property tax yet?
Well, I was going to ask you that as an extension of Richard's question.
Oh my God.
You're very animated there. Take a breath.
Animated because, you know what I mean? I think Richard is asking me that because he wants me to respond. But
no, I think he's asking because you painted a picture of income equality as you should, because we see it all over. We hear the discussions about the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer. We hear the discussions about the middle class crumbling, shrinking to almost nothing. We have a strong middle class in the country.
That's why.
And we have middle class professionals who are moving back home and struggling to pay mortgage and not even being able to pay mortgage. So the middle class has shrunk in the country, which is never good for our country. But in the context of an extension of Richard's question, what do you think should be happening?
I feel I'm a hostile witness here,
The Minister of Finance has with 2 lawyers here. You are 2 attorneys here, so I'm not the attorney. The Minister of Finance was at pains to identify some of the challenges financially and fiscally in terms of the subsidy and what the subsidies cost in the country. He identified, well, yes, we got a windfall, and you did a good job of that. We all know we have a windfall from the circumstances outside Ukraine, etc. And clearly, we have a lot of bills to pay from rising debt to GDP, etc. A lot of loans to pay. Workers want better negotiating terms and conditions. He identified, well, if we give them what they want, we're going in the realm of billions of dollars owed and added to the recurrent expenditure every month. What should be happening in part with this windfall to position this country out of this cycle we seem to be in?
Well, I'm the politician here. I know you are a senator, and I respect that. But I was in the cabinet, so my perspective, obviously, is going to be impacted by that as it will be different for all of us here. So you have to excuse me if I take the position I take, because fortunately or unfortunately, and I work with many of them. And so I think I have some kind of understanding. I used to prepare a budget. A budget was prepared. And one of the things that, what he's doing now, he's taking what I expect him to do is take a more sobering approach, because every year before that, it was just, it was just over the top to the point it was,
I can see clearly the rain is gone.
Yeah. And all kinds of, so I think he understands 7 years into people are disenjoyed. I think the Tobago licks gave them a wake-up call. And remember, they're getting data and they're always doing surveying. So they're getting a pulse of the country and they understand that what's going on. I think it's not just politics as usual, but a sense of, the country.
Well, but those are the ministers are credibility problem. Because one of the questions at the spotlight was, yes, a credibility problem.
Yeah, but that's what I'm coming to, and I'm telling you that even the inflation rate, can I just say this as calmly as I can? The inflation rate is now 5%. Now one would say, oh, that's lovely, we have a low thing. But that inflation rate is really a reflection of what they call demand pull, meaning that there's no consumer. If you read the report from not the central bank governor, it's a monetary report they do twice a year. They themselves said that the consumer confidence is low, which means that people are not borrowing, which people are not investing. And why? One of the major, as I was reading about the United States, they call it the RPI, Retail Price Index. And they say the number one indicator of the health of an economy or how well an economy is doing is consumer confidence. That's number one. And what they're saying is when they look at the inflation, at the headline inflation, and they disaggregate it, consumer confidence is very low. That's across the board. And that is because you cannot ask me to look at this year. It's every year they have to go to they have to go to Parliament because they have to get funding. But supposedly it's a continuum of what you said you were going to do and what you have to achieve. So that from that, people say, wow, this government really working hard. And yes, there's things that they couldn't deliver that were out of their control, but they're doing well. But when you look at the reality, I think a lot of people, like myself, have reached a point that they say, how much do I believe? And it's reflected in the growth rate of inflation. The fact that we had a 1.4 million population just the other day, the CSO does keep up to date with population numbers. It's gone to 1.3 something. So that tells you there's a lot of migration going on. So the minister knows at this point in time, I believe, with the AV drilling, thing, you lose confidence. Why didn't you go to the court? You have to understand that people stay quiet because they vote once a year, once every 5 years. But it does not, you have to read those figures to understand ease of doing business. Where do we go on the corruption price index? And you know what is one of the main things? Is how hard it is to do business. You know who doesn't have a problem doing business? You know who could pick up a phone and get all these certificates and everything in 2 tours? You know who have to wait a year, and I know it personally, not for me, but people I know. You know why our food bill is what it is? Why don't you ask that? Why must we import 80% of our food, a $5 billion? And the last monetary report for May, the head of the Inspector of Financial Institutions said that our food bill went up by 20% since then. Who is importing all of this food? And why are we importing so much food? And don't tell me size matters, because as I've said in an article, Holland, which is 224 times smaller than America, size of Maryland, is the second to United States global exporter of food. So we have a faculty in agriculture. Before that, we had, I can't remember what we called it, that started it off. We have a Ministry of Agriculture. Why is it the government is not looking at food security and food import? And just as how they went up the value chain with natural gas, why won't they do it with?
Well, is it the question you asked earlier on several times? Who is benefiting from the status quo?
But absolutely. Why are we? I mean, if I want to eat Parmesan cheese, which I do want to eat, if I want to eat Swiss cheese, which I want to eat, I must pay for it. Because you know that the poor man can't even afford the ordinary cheese wrapped up in the plastic. If I want to eat those fancy cheeses, if I want to eat Gouda and all of them fancy things, if I want to eat grapes and strawberries, put up the tax on that. Put it up and you can target it. Why? There's some things you may not have the ability to target, but target it, right? But you're not targeting it. You're not targeting it. Don't you understand what I am trying to say as being in government and hopefully understanding government policy? There are different ways of achieving objectives. So some people may do it in a very brash way, maybe with the airport building, and you say, oh my God, how could you be paying back your financiers? But when you see how much coffee this country drinks, how much coffee does this country drink?
So you're saying the policies are skewed to what benefits to the business class?
Exactly. And we are not getting a benefit from it. What you're doing is using up my foreign exchange, right? Creating low value jobs. Why we spend all this money on education? To create low value jobs, which cannot mine a parrot on a stick. Creating this, importing all of this, why all this coffee in this country? Why all these fast food things? Why? So that we spend more on Ministry of Health. Most of the diseases that we have in this country are related to non-communicable diseases. And someone told me who said to me, if you go down the Eastern Main Road, you are going to find a pharmacy, a fast food, and I think they told me something else, right along the Eastern Main Road. And all these are imported.
We have 3 minutes left, and I don't want to put you in trouble. We have 3 minutes left. You made a really striking statement a couple of months ago.
Oh, Lord.
Which was related to the crime surge in the country and the drug trade in the country.
Yeah, I want to live. I want to live.
No, but you want to live. I have no illusions about that. You said the Manning administration, which spoke to big fish, small fish, and the state's ability to deal with the drug trade. Do you think that status quo still exists today?
Well, what I will say is no question. What you see, I always use these analogies, I come to the doctor with a fever. If the doctor only gives me 2 Panadol and tell me go home, did you solve the problem? You got to find out what causing the fever. So what you're seeing is the symptoms of a problem. And unfortunately, the Afro-Trinidadians are the ones, young Afro-Trinidadians are being the ones who you see the symptoms being out there. And they're the ones, unfortunately, the Prime Minister and Minister of National Security and the COP says family values. My God, how insulting you could be to people. How insulting you could be to people. So yes, it's not going after the big fish, Because if you're going after the big fish, just look at the airport scandal. Anybody in jail yet? Not that I have anything against any of them. So it's never personal with me because I'm friendly with some of them. I'm dealing with the fact, don't worry the big fish approach because they have money card done. They're tied up for 20 years. And by the time you finally get a hearing or whatever you're supposed to get, they're already dead.
But clearly, that's not this administration. The Manning administration couldn't seem to deal with it.
No.
Couldn't deal with it.
Let me just say this. You told me I have my 3 minutes. You have your shoe. So in all fairness to Mr. Manning, which I was very much a supporter of, he always said to me, you have to build a Chinese wall. Don't let the drugs come in. Stop them. Let them take another path. See, Trinidad getting too hot. Let's find another route. So disrupt them. How do you do that? The Revenue Authority. You don't know that the Revenue Authority, when we had the 3/5, but I don't know why Mr. Manning called election when he did. It's unfortunate that he did. When we had the 3/5, we had the US helping us, and we were building a Revenue Authority where if you were in certain sensitive areas, you had to do what SORT had to do. You had to do the drug testing, see if you're lying, and all that, and we can move you, right? That's the Revenue Authority. The gambling, he was closing it down. I remember sitting in a policy formulation committee meeting, some people trying to forget that Mr. Manning said, we're closing it down. He was closing it down because he understood the connection. The FIU, I was in charge of the FIU, and I interviewed people from United States, and I made it clear, and Mr. Manning supported me. I said, I want a head of an FIU that does not come from the region, that has a proven track record in dealing with the drug trade. And the Washington sent people to meet with me to do that. So that was the FIU, that was the SORT, that was the OPVs, that was the Revenue Authority, and then we were going with the DPP. How long that poor DPP asking for staff, right? And I said we need to create a section in the DPP that only deals with money laundering. Train them, send them for training, bring somebody, ring fence them from the rest of the community. So do not say that. And the big buildings talk. How many people said big buildings, big buildings, big buildings? Who was pushing that head? And when Mr. Manning was building the campus, for us to have, we must rent. We must rent and waste our money every year where people sit down and make money off of us instead of for this country. And Mr. Manning was, and that is why, in my respectful opinion, there are people would have sat in that cabinet room, would know exactly putting the two and two together, understand. He was in the position of creating a legacy. And I believe, I had no reason not to believe him because I was in charge of the Revenue Authority. I was in charge of the gambling. I was in charge of the FIU. And I got no other instruction but to do what I was doing, which is why the Revenue Authority came to Parliament, the property tax came to Parliament, and the gambling thing was closing down. So I'm sorry. And what he did with OPVs and thought I wasn't really part of poker, but I can tell you he was taking a comprehensive way that he was creating a wall that not firing a shot, but by the time he finished with you, Trinidad is not a place to do business.
Is that part of the reason why he wasn't in power after? He went after?
Well, let me just say this. In my own constituency, I can say this. My own constituency executive told me in no uncertain terms that they did not support Mr. Manning, that they supported Rowley. And they told me to my face. So I have to assume that was a story along the East-West corridor. So all I can say is that Mr. Manning, nobody has ever accused him or ever they tried with something with a car. Nobody has ever accused him of being on the take. Nobody, and that's what they don't want. Because when you are independent of them, and when you don't want to be validated by them, and when you don't want to go to their house and sit down and have a cocktail party with them, and be accepted by these people.
Who wants to have cocktail parties and be accepted by them?
Huh?
You're talking in very general terms.
When you need that validation, and validation from certain people, you're very easy to be persuaded. And one thing Mr. Manning told me, by the way, he told me that Eric Williams had told him that, and he practices, and I practiced it based on him. He said Eric Williams never went to their parties, and they used to get vexed for that because they wanted to whisper in his ear. Mr. Manning never went. That's why they call him arrogant. I never went. And with all the talk they're talking, this government could do much better. When Eric Williams passed the COSAT, the next day, the Guardian put a thing with Hitler and Eric Williams. But thank God for COSAT, the Concordat, sorry, not COSAT, Concordat. Thank God for the Concordat, because all those people who have an education today and are doctor and lawyer, it wasn't that they didn't have the ability, they didn't have the opportunity. That's why America is the land of opportunity. And when he did that with the Concordat, the Roman Catholic Church had a fit. I'm a Roman Catholic. I went to convert. So don't think about talking my own people. I went there. But
yeah,
when
we
they
hear the
did
accent.
that, no, so worry about that. Oh gosh, forget that now. Well, oh God, I didn't even know that. But anyway, that's beside the point. Richard Ragoobarsingh. The point is, when he passed the Concordat and say 80% on merit, 80% on merit, next day in the Guardian, he was Hitler. This government is making joke. They don't care about the people at the bottom. And I am saying that with no thing. It is not only that they keep with these subsidies as a way of keeping them down and giving them no other outlet, not developing agro industries, agriculture, cultural tourism. Not only that they're not doing anything there, but their policies benefit only one group and one group. They have money card done and they are set up for life by the policies and the legislation of this government. And worse yet, for this government to sit down there and be ill-speaking the young Afro-Trinidadians who already don't feel good about themselves, what do you expect to be the turnout? I want to tell you straight, you said I'm speaking passionately. Well, yes, I am, because I'm disgusted. So I don't want, you see this new budget, he's going to be more sober. He knows that the CSO just published that we had negative growth in spite of all of that. But I would love to hear him do like what Motley did. Tell me the bad news, but give me the good news sooner, man. God.
Karen and Mr. Sheriff, thank you for being with us this morning.
What you say, Richard? Richard was one of my former students.
Yeah, but Karen, are you still a member
of the...
I don't mind talk. Are you still a member of the People's National Movement?
Yes, and you know what my answer to that is? I'll give you my answer to that. When Rowley was bad talking Mr. Manning, remember with the off-commissioning, even with the property tax, how Rowley, we're going to hell in a handbasket, that what going on with Udicott is worse than UNC airport scandal. Anybody said he wasn't PNM? Anybody said that Rowley wasn't PNM then? When he wanted to make it his business to make the prime minister lose the election, anybody said he was not PNM? No. So if he was still PNM, because I don't support the leader, does not make me less of a PNM. Matter of fact, it makes me a lover of my country. So if he's a PNM, I could be a PNM too.
Karen,
to say to that, Richard.
Thank you very much. Thank you for being with us.
No.
And you can join Karen and Nancy Sherry this afternoon, the afternoon power drive with Richard Norrie from 4 to 6 p.m. Have a great day. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
All right, Karen Nunes.
She's even more animated this morning. You think when you see Paya this morning, she's been more tired in the afternoon drive.
PNM forever. Not under this leader.
It shall prevail, not so.
Wendell is smiling.
Wait now, with potholes north, south, east, and west are gone.
Thank you, Karen. All the best here.
Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye. All right, of course,
Recording
that was Karen
stopped.
Nunes, the sheriff. Let's get into our news brief. All courtesy Champlain Auto Services.
This is your news bulletin from Power 102 Digital.
Former PNM Finance Minister